Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line here on TVP World, where we bring you the best of the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Keita. As Russia and the US attempt to negotiate peace for Ukraine, energy has become a pawn in the talks. In the meantime, the US has delivered on one of its commitments, and that concerns India. The country is now subject to 50% tariffs, given its continued Russian energy purchases. Jan Kennedy brings us more.
From steel to shrimp to diamonds, many Indian-made goods sold to the United States will now face a 50% tariff, double the previous rate. The move follows President Donald Trump's threats earlier this month after India increased imports of discounted Russian oil over the past 3 years. Trump argues that buying energy from Russia funds the country's war effort against Ukraine.
We've made a lot of progress, and as you know, we put a 50% tariff on India on oil. They're the second largest. They're very close to China in terms of the purchase of oil from Russia.
But Reuters reports that the United States discussed a possible return to Russian energy on the sidelines of peace negotiations in Moscow earlier this month. And again a couple of weeks later when Russian President Vladimir Putin visited Alaska. One of the points reportedly raised was Exxon returning to the Sakhalin-1 oil field.
ExxonMobil is extended reach drilling technology that made Sakhalin-1 possible in the first place. So without that expertise and without reliable access to Western equipment and finances, the Russian side basically struggled to sustain high rates of production.
As a result, Sakhalin could increase its output from the 100 to 160,000 barrels currently back to as many as 220,000 per day. Additionally, the US had reportedly proposed to lift sanctions on equipment for Russia's LNG projects. Historically, Russia prioritized deliveries via pipelines and neglected LNG technology. But Europe switching to other supplies has created a bottleneck for Russian energy exports. To make matters worse, most of the ships used to facilitate LNG exports from the Arctic LNG 2 project are at risk of further sanctions.
15 vessels, one is under sanctioned, and it was only Russians, and the rest of them, it means 14, is either belongs to Japanese, either to Greek, either to the UK companies. So it means that even if Arctic LNG, now all sanctions by the US would lifted, the biggest question what actually the EU or the UK or even Japan would do.
Customers are another issue. Formerly Russia's biggest buyer, the EU is adamant it will soon stop importing Russian gas altogether.
We ban all imports of Russian gas under new contracts and existing spot contracts taking effect as of the end of this year. We ban remaining imports of Russian pipeline gas and LNG under existing long-term contracts by the end of 2027.
Already, most EU members have stopped buying Russian fossil fuels, prompting Russia's energy revenue to dwindle from over €1 billion per day in 2022 to less than €600 million currently.
So according to media reports, at first the US wanted to sweeten the deal with the Kremlin by making Europeans go back to Russian energy. When Europeans balked, another offer was made. So how important is it for the Russian energy sector? I'm now joined by Tsvetorin Nikolov, energy and climate analyst at the Center for the Study of Democracy. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's begin with a visual on India now being subject to one of the highest US tariffs as a consequence of purchasing Russian oil. It's now the tariffs are at 50%. So here on the visual, we see the share of Russian crude processed at India's second biggest refinery. It went from 0 before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine to around 50% recently. So India has scaled back purchases of Russian oil recently, but they say that they are not going to stop buying Russian oil. In your opinion, is Russian oil that good of a deal for India? India reports that they've saved $17 billion with Russian purchases.
Hello. Yes, by the way, let's begin with this. The purpose of the US tariff is to pressure Delphi into reconsidering the extent of its reliance on Russian oil. This reliance has grown at a remarkable pace. Before the war in Ukraine, Russian crude accounted for less than 1% of Indian imports. By 2023 and 2024, it had surged to more than a third, and in some months, even close to 40%. And imports from Russia rose from under $10 billion to more than 46 billion in a single year, with raw materials and fertilizer, by the way, contributing heavily. Fertilizers imports alone grow by almost 400%. 400%. So India has become more than a consumer in this story. And the reason why this is happening is because Russia chose to re-export its natural gas, crude oil, and other resources to India because of the European sanctions. Some interesting story about that is it has also emerged as a refining hub for Russian crude. Also, this is the case with Turkey. The European Union is a big part of this picture, and by 2024, the EU was importing 13% of its seaborne diesel and jet fuel from India, much of it refined in facilities that run largely on Russian oil. And in fact, the European imports of oil products from the three main Indian refineries processing Russian crude increased by nearly 60% compared with pre-war averages. And that's why Brussels sees this loophole that undermines its own embargo on Russian fuels. And the result is that Indian refineries now face not just pressure from Washington, but restriction from Europe as well.
So do you think that India can abandon Russian oil completely? Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, the question, yes, it's possible, and the question is how fast India can shift away from Russian barrels if it's forced to. And technically, the country can do it quite rapidly. Indian refiners already have long-term supply arrangements with Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. They're also accustomed to buying spot cargoes from the United States, Canada, and some African producers. In August alone, they managed to secure 7 billion barrels from non-Russian suppliers within days. And because all contracts are written 1 to 3 months in advance, a major change in sourcing can be executed in a single quarter. The main problem here is that Delphi is cautious. It has locked in long-term deals such as Rosneft's 10-year contract with Reliance worth $13 billion annually, and Russia has invested heavily in India's energy infrastructure. So maybe this is the main case. But India can phase out Russian crude oil and natural gas.
I'd like to move on actually to the Russian and U.S. Energy deals that we're talking about in the media. How much do Russians actually need the Western technology to develop their energy sector? We know that ExxonMobil's tech was crucial to developing Sakhalin-1's oil field. We're going to bring up a visual. I think we've got that right now. And we know that the U.S. has been discussing technology-related issues to LNG. What do you think, how do you feel in terms of Russia's need for this Western technology? The country itself has not actually prioritized the development of this technology. So do Russians need this Western technology for that?
Yeah, just for the context, speculation continues that energy issues might become part of any US-Russia talks on Ukraine. Ideas such as ExxonMobil returning to the Sakhalin-1 oil project or sanctions being eased on Russian liquefied natural gas have been mentioned. They're best understood as bargaining chips rather than likely policies. Exxon withdrew in 2022 and would need direct approval from Washington to go back. And this is really important because LNG sanctions involve both the United States and also the European Union. And any change would require coordinated decisions. And at this stage, these are hypothetical scenarios, not real prospects. But to your question. The
Sure.
more important question here is how reliant Russia has been on Western technologies. Domestic onshore oil production has held up relatively well, but its most ambitious energy projects have always depended on outside know-how. For example, offshore Arctic drilling, advanced refining, and especially LNG require sophisticated compressors, turbines, liquefaction trains, cryogenic valves, and etc. Almost all of these came from Western or Japanese suppliers. And we already know that after 2022, that supply chain was cut off. And the consequences are clear. The Arctic LNG 2 project, a flagship of Russia's future exports, has been repeatedly disrupted. Without enough ice class tankers and without European ports available for ship to ship transfers, production has been intermittent. And the United States has sanctioned vessels and affiliates adding further constraints. Russia has turned to Chinese equipment, but the problem here is it doesn't match Western reliabilities or efficiency. And this is reflected in numbers. The Russian LNG exports fell by about 4% in the first half of 2025 to roughly 15 million tons. An isolation that is not catastrophic, but it represents a stagnation at a time when Moscow had promised growth.
Okay, so if Russia wants to move ahead with its plans, it will need to work with the West. Well, essentially, it depends on Western cooperation. Okay. So since 2022, Europe has been aiming to move away from Russian energy, and the goal is still to move away from Russian energy by 2027. But here we're in a situation with the US signaling that it is open to do business with Russia regardless. So how is Europe supposed to interpret this in the context of defense cooperation with the US?
The European Union have got a strong position in terms of what's happening with Russia. We already know, and the European Commission's roadmap shows us that all national governments must phase out Russian oil and gas, and only the case. And here the problem is we have to know it's Turk Stream. That's the main problem. CSD, Center for Study of Democracy, our think tank is based in Sofia, wrote thousands of publications and posts that Hungary and Slovakia and the whole Central and Eastern European Union and also the whole European Union can phase out the Russian oil and gas, and I hope that is going to happen in next 2 years. The problem here is, of course, we already said Turk Stream and what is going to happen with this project, and if we're going to switch our imports with the U.S. traders. The problem here is what is going to be the price. Which means that the national governments and the traders must negotiate with the US traders. And here we need cooperation because, for example, Bulgaria which is a country that has got a small consumption of natural gas. The price is not going to be competitive. But if we buy the whole natural gas for the whole region, then everything is going to change. So here is the case. European Union has the position, and what we have to do is just to make our policies and our roadmaps and strategic documents into reality and political movements in will.
Okay. And do you expect that these developments that we hear of may move peace negotiations forward for Ukraine, or is this just a separate chapter entirely to Russia-US relations, and it's actually showing us the true face of superpower relations?
I'm not really sure if these movements from ExxonMobil are part of political strategy. Of course, Trump's policies and of course his foreign policies with Russia and the negotiation in Ukraine are really difficult, and every day they switch and change the positions and what's going to happen. So we don't know what's happening there. But what we In what we must be sure is that if Russia is not going to negotiate and find a way for a ceasefire, the US administration is going to impose sanctions on Russia and is going to impose tariffs on third countries like India and Turkey and other countries. With the purpose and the goal to try to find a way to make Russia under pressure.
Would you say that Ukrainian peace is becoming a matter of deals to be struck between the world's greatest superpowers, and this being Russia, the US, and China? We mentioned China earlier in our conversation. Would you say that there is perhaps a sense that Europe is way out of the picture, especially in light of the impact or lack of impact of the sanctions packages? And really, in many ways, perhaps Europe is only here to provide a few tanks and some ammunition. Obviously, I say that in inverted commas.
No, Europe is part of the picture, but we cannot compare United States of America and Europe. The problem of Europe is that we cannot, in this moment, maybe in future we're going to do it, but right now we cannot secure the future of Ukraine alone. We need United States. This is the greatest country right now, and it's with the strongest army, and is coordinating all our policies in terms of defense and in terms of what's happening with NATO. So also is coordinating the help and the weapons that are going to Ukraine. So we cannot do it without United States. Of course, Europe is really important, but it's not the only one. It's not the only side that is going to change the situation in Ukraine.
Of course. Just as we wrap up, I wanted to ask about the recent Ukrainian drone attacks of Russian refineries and the impact on them. Our recent guest, Sergei Vakulenko from the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center, said that these efforts against Russia are actually negligible. And I wanted to ask about your thoughts on this. And before you do that, just to listen to a soundbite from him.
Russia refines 5 million barrels of oil per day. So there's a huge surplus of diesel and about 10-15% surplus of gasoline. But last year, Ukraine didn't manage to create a proper shortage of fuels in Russia, and definitely didn't manage to create a shortage for the military effort.
So just your thoughts on whether the recent Ukrainian attacks, drone attacks on Russia, actually have any impact on Russia?
The Ukrainian drone campaign against Russian refineries has become one of the most innovative aspects of the conflict. Unlike conventional missile strikes, drones can be deployed at relatively low cost and target specific facilities with precision. In 2024, Ukrainian strikes forced as much as 14% of Russian refining capacity offline at the peak. With repairs, the number fell back to around 10%. But in August 2025, after a new wave of attacks, outreach rose again to between 10 and 7%. And that is a very significant share of capacity, equivalent to millions of barrels of lost processing. And the immediate consequence has been fuel shortage in certain regions. And in Crimea and the Russian Far East, motorists faced quicks and higher price. So gasoline A95 reached the record level in some areas. Moscow and, of course, St. Petersburg are less affected because their refineries are concentrated and more heavily protected, but the national impact is clear. And also there is the export dimension. Russia is not only an exporter of crude oil, but also of refined products such as diesel and gasoline. And when its refineries are disrupted, the government often bans or limits products exports to stabilize the domestic market. And at the same time, it increases crude oil exports through Baltic and Black Sea ports to keep revenues flowing.
Okay, Tsvetomir Nikolov.
That's the impact.
Okay, thank you so much. Tsvetomir Nikolov, energy and climate analyst at the Center for the Study of Democracy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes the bottom line for today. I was your host, Marie Cato. We bring you the best of regional business Monday to Friday at 5:10 CET on TVP World. And in the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. Goodbye.